Left as a baby. I never imagined a DNA test would bring her back into my life. My story began on a cold November morning in 1963. I don't remember it, of course, but I'd been told that a passerby discovered me wrapped in a thin blanket, left alone on the steps of a small-town church. I was only a few days old. By the time police arrived, my birth mother had vanished. No note, no explanation, just me, left to face the world without answers. I was soon adopted by a kind couple who gave me love, stability, and a home. But no matter how much I cherished them, a shadow followed me, the question of where I came from, and why I was left behind. Growing up, I wrestled with the thought, was I unwanted? Forgotten? Or was there more to the story? For decades, I lived with that mystery. Every birthday was bittersweet, a reminder that somewhere out there, a woman once carried me, then walked away. I built a life, raised children of my own, and tried to bury the ache. But deep down, the questions never faded. And then, nearly 60 years later, a simple DNA test changed everything. What I thought would be just a curiosity, some percentages, some distant connections, turned out to be the key that unlocked my past, and brought me face to face with the one person I had waited my entire life to meet, my mother. But how do you begin a life when your very first chapter is a mystery? To answer that, I have to take you back to where it all began. I grew up knowing that my life had started with a mystery. My adoptive parents, Margaret and Thomas, never kept the truth from me. They told me gently, when I was old enough to understand, that I hadn't come to them in the usual way. I wasn't born in a hospital where family members gathered to celebrate. I wasn't placed in my mother's arms for a first photograph. Instead, my life began on the doorstep of a church in a quiet town outside of Denver. A parishioner arriving early that morning heard faint cries. There I was, bundled in a thin blanket, tucked carefully into a cardboard box. Whoever left me made sure I would be found quickly, but they made no attempt to be seen. There was no name. No note. No clue about where I came from. The newspapers later called me the baby in the box. For years, people whispered about it in the community. My parents told me that when they first held me, I was impossibly small, with a tuft of dark hair and wide eyes that didn't seem to blink. They said it was in that moment, despite the unusual circumstances, they knew they would raise me as their own. Still, even as a child, I could sense the weight of what wasn't said. I knew I had been left. I knew that somewhere, a woman had carried me inside her for 9 months, only to walk away. The thought lodged itself deep in my heart. And while my parents' love gave me stability, that unanswered question, why was I left behind, would follow me all through my life. My parents gave me love, but even as a child I felt the weight of what wasn't said. And soon, the questions began to spill out. As I grew older, the questions grew louder. By the time I was in grade school, I began to notice how other kids would talk about their grandparents, aunts, and cousins. Family trees were drawn in classrooms, names filling in neat branches. Mine always felt like it had missing limbs, empty spaces where answers should have been. One night, I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my adoptive mom, Margaret. I must have been around 7. I looked at her and asked, why didn't my real mom want me? The words tumbled out before I could stop them. Margaret's eyes softened, and she reached across the table to hold my hand. Honey, we don't know the reasons, she said quietly. But I do know this, your mother loved you enough to want you found. And we love you enough to never let you go. Her reassurance comforted me, but it never erased the ache. At school, I sometimes felt different, as if there was an invisible label pinned to me, the abandoned baby. I kept most of those feelings inside, but they shaped me more than I realized. I learned early on to wonder about identity, about where I truly belonged. Teenage years only made the question sharper. Was my mother still alive? Did she think about me on my birthday? Did I have siblings who didn't even know I existed? Every answer I didn't have made me feel like part of me was missing. Even in a loving home, I felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. And the older I became, the more determined I was to find them, no matter how long it might take. As I grew into adulthood, those childhood questions didn't disappear, they grew louder. And with every passing year, I became more determined to find answer. If you've ever wondered about your own roots or carried unanswered questions, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if you're finding this journey powerful, consider subscribing so you don't miss the rest of it. When I became an adult, life began to move quickly. I went to college, started a career, fell in love, and eventually became a parent myself. Holding my first child in my arms was overwhelming. I remember staring at her tiny face and realizing for the first time how impossible it must have been for my birth mother to walk away from me. That moment deepened the mystery. It made me wonder, what kind of pain or circumstance could have driven her to leave? As the years passed, I tried searching for answers. I scoured old newspaper archives, hoping to find reports about a baby left at a church in 1963. I requested my adoption records, only to receive heavily redacted documents filled with blacked-out names and missing details. I even hired a private investigator at one point, but every lead seemed to dry up. Each dead end felt like another door slamming shut. Still, the questions never left me. They crept in during quiet moments, holidays, birthdays, even when I looked in the mirror. Whose eyes did I have? Whose laugh did I inherit? Genetics didn't lie, but my history remained locked away. By my 40s, I began to accept that I might never know. I had a family of my own who loved me, and I poured myself into being the kind of parent who never left my children guessing about their worth. But even then, late at night, the thought lingered, somewhere out there was a woman who had given me life, and I had no idea who she was, or if she was even still alive. Just when I thought the trail had gone cold forever, a small box appeared in my life, one that promised answers I had been chasing for nearly 60 years. By the time I was in my late 50s, I had nearly resigned myself to never finding out the truth. The trail had grown colder with every year, and I figured if the answers hadn't revealed themselves by now, they probably never would. Then one afternoon, my daughter handed me a small box and said, "Dad, you should try this." It was a DNA test kit. At first, I laughed it off. What's the point? I've searched for decades and come up empty, I told her. But she insisted. You never know. Technology is different now. Maybe it could give you something the old ways couldn't. I stared at that little box for days before finally opening it. Spitting into a tube and mailing it off felt almost too simple for something that carried the weight of my entire identity. Still, I sealed the envelope and sent it on its way, half expecting nothing to come of it. The waiting was the hardest part. Weeks felt like months as I checked my email obsessively, wondering if this was just another false hope. But deep down, I couldn't stop myself from imagining what might happen if it actually worked. Would I find a sibling? A cousin? Or maybe, just maybe, the woman who had once placed me in that box so long ago? The idea seemed impossible, yet the hope was enough to keep me restless at night. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of possibility, a sense that maybe, after nearly 60 years, the questions that had haunted me could finally be answered. When the results finally came in, I thought I was prepared for anything. But nothing could have prepared me for the name that appeared on my screen. Isn't it incredible how one small decision can change everything? If you're still with me, give this video a like, it really helps share stories like this with more people who might need to hear them. The email finally arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, my heart pounding as I clicked open the message. Your results are ready. I scrolled past the percentages of Irish, English, and German ancestry. Interesting, but not what I was looking for. Then I saw it, DNA matches. At first, there were distant cousins, people whose names meant nothing to me. My heart sank. And then I froze. At the top of the list was someone marked as a close relative, potential parent/child. My hands shook so badly I had to put the coffee cup down. Could this be real? After all these years, could I actually be looking at a direct connection to the woman who had left me behind? I hesitated for hours before sending a message. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I typed, Hello, I believe we may be related. I was adopted as an infant in 1963 and recently took a DNA test. I don't mean to intrude, but I would love to connect if you're open to it. I hit send, then waited. Days passed with no reply. Just as I was beginning to convince myself it was another dead end, a message came through. It was from a woman named Carol. Her words were brief, but they stopped me cold. I think I know who your mother is. We need to talk. I read that line over and over, tears streaming down my face. For the first time in nearly 60 years, someone out there actually knew the answer I had been chasing all my life. My heart raced as I realized that what had once been a lifelong mystery was now within reach. One message changed everything. And within days, I was driving toward the reunion I had dreamed of my entire life. A week later, I found myself driving down a quiet suburban street, palms sweating against the steering wheel. Carol and I had exchanged messages, and she confirmed what I had only dared to hope: my birth mother was alive. Not only alive, but waiting to meet me. When I pulled into the driveway of a modest one-story home, I sat frozen for a moment, unable to move. 60 years of questions, 60 years of imagining her face, and now, she was just a few steps away. Carol opened the door first and greeted me with a warm hug, but my eyes quickly moved past her. Standing just inside, her hands trembling, was an older woman with silver gray hair and eyes that looked strangely familiar, eyes that mirrored my own. "Hello," she whispered, her voice cracking. I couldn't speak. Instead, I walked forward, and before I knew it, we were in each other's arms. She held me as if trying to make up for 6 lost decades in a single embrace. Both of us were crying too hard to get the words out. When we finally sat down, she told me her truth. Back in 1963, she was barely 19, unmarried, and terrified. Her family had pressured her, insisting she give me up in secrecy to avoid shame. She loved me, she said, but at that time she felt she had no choice. Leaving me at the church steps was her desperate attempt to ensure I would be found safe. Hearing her story didn't erase the pain of abandonment, but it helped me understand the impossible position she had been in. More than anything, it gave me the closure I had longed for. Sitting across from her, holding her hand, I realized that the woman I had spent a lifetime searching for had never truly left my heart. I went looking for closure. What I found was something even greater. Driving home from that reunion, I felt like I had lived an entire lifetime in a single afternoon. For 60 years, I had carried questions that weighed like stones in my chest. Now, suddenly, I had answers. They weren't always easy answers. There was still pain, loss, and regret woven into the truth, but there was also love, and that was enough. I kept replaying her words in my mind: "I wanted you to be safe." For decades, I believed I had been unwanted. That belief shaped so much of who I was. But hearing her say she had loved me all along, just trapped by circumstances she couldn't control, changed something deep inside me. It was like a locked door had finally opened, and light had poured into a place that had been dark for far too long. Over the following months, we began building a new relationship. Slowly, carefully, we learned each other's lives, the family I never knew, the stories I had missed, even the small details, like the way she took her coffee or the songs she hummed while cooking. They were ordinary things, but to me, they were treasures. Looking back now, I realize that DNA test was more than just science. It wasn't just about percentages, or matches, or family trees. It was a bridge, one that reached across decades of silence and brought me back to the beginning of my story. If you've ever lived with unanswered questions about who you are, I want you to know this: sometimes the truth comes when you least expect it. For me, it came in a small box delivered to my doorstep, and it led me back to the woman who gave me life. After 60 years, I finally found my mother, and, in a way, I finally found myself. Looking back, I realize this story isn't just about me, it's about anyone who has ever searched for belonging. If you know someone who's on that journey, share this video with them. And if you'd like to hear more real stories like mine, subscribe and join me here. We've got so much more to uncover together.